That is the question we are asking today. I'm Ahron Young. Let's bring in US journalist J.D. Durkin and commentator and Democratic strategist Calvin Dark. Gentlemen, great to have you back at Ticker.
Nice to join you.
J.D., I'll start with you.
Good to be here.
Now we know more. Talk to us. How serious do we think this crime could be?
It's a matter of who you ask. I think it's a fair description to call this a little bit of a Rorschach test, as we say, because here in the States, Aaron, if you ask, maybe more liberal sympathizers or people aligned with the interests of the current Biden administration, they're inclined to tell you it is a big deal. And objectively, I think to many degrees it is. This is historic. If you step back and you take the 10,000-foot view of this, this is a former president of the United States who had to have his home searched by the federal agency of his predecessor. But of course, Republicans in this country are inclined to use this as an opportunity to sort of beat up on the status quo of law enforcement at the federal level. And some are calling as far as to defund the FBI. I have no idea what that means. But objectively, it is a big deal that something like this happened. It remains to be seen how this is going to play itself out. Surprise, surprise. Like you and I, as I've told you before, Aaron, I got out of the business of trying to guess or prognosticate the future of Donald Trump. For all I know, he will somehow come out stronger than this, because every time we've had a big controversy, he certainly seems to have in the past.
Yeah, I have no idea why you'd want to get out of that business. It sounds like a fun business to be in. Calvin, let's talk about the division between both sides here. Republicans essentially having to choose between the concept of criticising defunding the FBI or potentially being back in office.
Yeah, well, the Republican response was really kind of interesting and kind of bizarre for me, because a lot of Republicans who, had kind of softened on their advocacy for Trump, particularly for running for future office, all out there defending him when this first happened without even knowing the fact. So that kind of surprised me, particularly since a lot of them were prosecutors. I think even one member of Congress was an FBI agent. Now, when it comes to defunding the FBI, this just shows that hypocrisy, because, a lot of what former President Trump has built his reputation on is fighting what he calls the left's attack on law enforcement. But now we see who's attacking the, law enforcement. And with this defunding, which, like you said, I don't even know what that means, it just goes to show that there isn't support for law enforcement when they're enforcing the law equally. So I think that's something that a lot of Republicans are going to pay for in the midterm.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. It's almost a bit of a trap, isn't it, in that term? We know that a magistrate, a judge in the US will now be deciding on the unsealing of these documents as well, going through that. JD, we've seen them want to defund the police, defund the FBI, will next be defund the courts as well, because they haven't got what they like. Is this something which is really just pushing divisions through all of those institutions? And when Trump talks about things in America never being like that, how much of that is his responsibility?
That's fair. I mean, listen, I've lived through many iterations to say we've never been as divided as we are. And people forget the history of the 1850s and the 1860s in this country, where we quite literally went to war with one another and we killed our fellow brother during the Civil War. But regardless, I mean, yes, this is going to be an opportunity for anyone to sort of who is already looking for justifications to go after Donald Trump, to say, aha, now perhaps we finally got him. I know there's a lot of people in this country, liberals and Democratic voters, they would love to see Donald Trump get indicted. And of course, his supporters are inclined to say, well, this is the weaponization of the DOJ. And they are promising retribution to some degree, Aaron, because depending on which polling you believe, there's still a strong indication Republicans will control one, if not both, chambers of Congress. And they are promising to go after the sort of Biden administration at the federal level if that happens. But like Calvin correctly said, though, I mean, look, we're within 90 days now of the midterm elections. It should be noted, the so-called raid on Mar-a-Lago was just outside the 90-day window. That tends to be the DOJ's guidance. We're now within 90 days. I don't anticipate much more on this story happening between now and the election. But shortly after the election, maybe Donald Trump announces sooner rather than later. It's a very sticky situation we haven't seen before.
Kind of reminds me, though, in the lead up to the 2016 election, when the FBI announced that they were having a look at back into Hillary Clinton and those emails. And that was seen by many as a real curse for her, that it gave people who were uncertain about whether to vote for Hillary Clinton an excuse to not vote for Hillary Clinton, therefore getting the Republicans and Donald Trump over the line. Your thoughts on that, Kelvin? Is this essentially payback from the Democrats or perhaps from the FBI?
No, I don't think so. And, one of the things that I thought about is, I'm here in Washington, D.C., where we can make anything political. When, the Republicans started talking about this being a weaponization of the DOJ, the FBI to settle political scores, I was reminded that Merrick Garland is one of the least like firebrand political people they are. In fact, let's keep in mind that a lot of people on the progressive left didn't like the fact that he was so not as active as they would have wanted him to be. So as soon as I heard this happening, I knew that this wasn't quite that. So I also want to just say, when you talk about Hillary Clinton, there are a lot of similarities that have been drawn between Hillary Clinton. Of course, the situations are very different. One thing that Hillary Clinton did do wasn't it 9 or 11 hours under oath, was questioned by Republicans about her situation, and she still went through it. So I think there's a big difference, and I think that the payback that Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, is kind of painting is one, unfair, and it's unfounded as well.
Yeah. Now, JD, the Justice Department doesn't want these files unsealed. Why is that? We talk about being open and transparent. Why not?
Well, the DOJ's argument here, Aaron, is to say in part that there's national security implications. This is an ongoing investigation that involves national security. They say they're concerned about perhaps some of the identities of the individuals involved. They also don't want to dissuade future witnesses from cooperating, which they said has been important. But I actually think on this part, Republicans are not entirely wrong. It is fair to call for transparency, and it's hard to believe that this affidavit, which essentially would be the justification for the DOJ to go forward with this incredible maneuver like this, that some parts of it shouldn't be released. I mean, the federal government is very good at using a thick black Sharpie to blacken out whatever they want in really important documents. No one's saying you have to release the entire thing, but give us some sense. What is this justification? What was the reason? What was the probable cause, as they say in the court of law, that led you to believe that a crime was committed and that evidence that you needed was at Mar-a-Lago? And what was the probable cause that you felt like the attorneys for the former president were not going to play ball with you and turn those documents over? And instead they say, well, we have our reasons, we're not going to release it. I actually think Republicans, and mind you, there are some Democrats like Senator Mark Warner as well, they're pushing for further answers. I anticipate we'll get some more answers, but we'll see what this judge has to say in Florida later on Thursday. I know a lot of news organizations, rightfully so, want that information as well.
And Kelvin, one of the reasons the DOJ says they don't want to is because of the threats to the FBI that we've been seeing as well. The FBI coming out over the past few days suggesting that their own agents are now receiving threats, and they've come out with all sorts of warnings as well. Did you ever think we'd see a time where FBI agents are being warned about their own safety because of political bias?
Not to this extent. And when we have cases that happened, the end of last week, where this isn't just in theory. And, one of the ironic things about all of this is I do agree that normally you would not release an affidavit because that would hamper the investigation going forward, maybe talking to witnesses. But in this case, since it is unprecedented, I think that transparency is better. One of the reasons for keeping it sealed is to protect people that haven't been charged yet, namely the former president. So I also think that's a key part of it, too, that you have the Republicans, Donald Trump, talking about it being so unfair, when actually this protects him, that if what they found in Mar-a-Lago isn't enough to charge him, he won't be charged. But I think that ship is safe.
Yeah, and JD, just finally, I mean, what does this all mean in terms of, is Trump potentially heading to prison here? Could it stop him? Trump, if anything, is Teflon. He has had so much thrown at him, and yet here he still is, everything from the Mueller investigation, etc. as well. What's the worst that could happen here, and what do you think is most likely to happen?
Well, it's interesting, Aaron, when you talk to some people in my circles, they say, the January 6th investigation, which is not the subject of our conversation, but it's still incredibly important. January 6th is one thing. This is one thing. Let's not forget, there's a Georgia special prosecutor that is investigating efforts to overturn the election. We still don't know exactly how that is going to play itself out. And there's a lot of people around the president that find themselves sort of enraptured there with regards to subpoenas. I don't think we're ever going to see the former president sort of get handcuffed publicly. I don't think we'll even see, I personally don't think we'll see him get indicted. But keep in mind, even if that were to happen, I think in the spirit of national unity, there is American history and precedence to say, I think even if there's a Democratic president to sort of either commute the sentence or issue a pardon to a degree, because it would be a wildly divisive moment in American history. Obviously, we have many of them. But you're right, Teflon Don is a nickname that has stayed with Donald Trump for a reason. I wouldn't be surprised if we're having this conversation a year or 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And it's increasingly clear he's the Republican nominee for president.
All right, JD Durkin and Kelvin Duck, thank you so much. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.